So picture this. You are, you're standing in your kitchen, right?
Hmm?
And you are meticulously washing out this plastic peanut butter jar.
Oh, yeah. We've all been there.
Right. You're scrubbing it, making sure there's absolutely no residue left
Yeah.
before you drop it into the blue bin because, you've got your recycling sorted into 3 different categories.
Naturally.
Naturally. And maybe you went completely out of your way to ask for the paper straw at the coffee shop this morning. Even though, let's be honest, it dissolved halfway through your iced latte.
They always do.
Always. And maybe, just maybe, you are feeling this very real, very heavy twang of guilt about booking a flight to see your family for the holidays.
Yeah.
Because you know exactly what that flight does to your personal carbon footprint.
Yeah, that guilt it's heavy. It's a real burden.
It is. You are doing the work. You're carrying the weight. But meanwhile, at this exact same moment, a massive new artificial intelligence data center just powered up somewhere. And it is drawing more electricity in a single day than your entire neighborhood does in a year.
Right. And that right there is the profound disconnect between what we do in our kitchens and what is actually happening on an industrial scale. We are constantly fed this idea that climate responsibility is this universally shared burden, right?
Like we're all in it together.
Exactly, like a collective tightrope we're all walking. But when you look at how that burden is actually distributed and who is being asked to carry the heaviest psychological weight, the architecture of the whole system looks entirely different.
Which brings us to the mission for this deep dive today. We're exploring a really fascinating and, frankly, highly controversial narrative that's taking hold right now.
Yeah, it's everywhere once you start looking for it.
It really is. It's this growing perception that the burden of achieving, net zero emissions is being systematically shifted onto the shoulders of everyday individuals, onto you, the listener. While these massive systemic entities, particularly the exploding AI and data center industries, are just quietly slipping out the back door of the hardest climate policy conversations.
And we should be clear here. The research suggests this isn't necessarily some formal written policy shift. It's more of a narrative and systemic trend that really serves to minimize the accountability of these larger entities.
Right. It's the expectation that the individual should simply take on more to offset the footprint of the big guys.
Exactly. The contrast between the micro-level anxiety of the individual tracking their daily plastic use and the macro-level exemptions of these trillion-dollar industries. It's really becoming the defining tension of modern environmental discourse.
Absolutely. And we're looking at a huge stack of research today to unpack all of this. We've got academic research from the University of Limerick. We have on-the-ground environmental justice reporting from the National Wildlife Federation.
Which is incredibly detailed, by the way.
So it's staggering. We also have policy analysis from the Environmental Coalition on Standards, or ECOs, and deep dive reports from Friends of the Earth. Plus, we're pulling from some really critical essays on technology and society, including the 1% Rule Substack.
It's a very diverse stack of sources.
It is. And I want to be entirely clear right up front. Some of these sources have real teeth.
Yeah.
And they take sharp aim at big tech, at fossil fuel companies, and specific government policies.
Right. They don't hold back.
They don't. But our job today isn't to pick a side or endorse a political platform or tell you who the bad guys are. Our job is to crack these arguments open so you can see exactly how this cultural and systemic narrative is being built and really understand the data underneath it.
Yeah, we are acting as your guides through the architecture of these arguments. We're just mapping the terrain of this debate, analyzing how the concepts are constructed without necessarily adopting them as our own.
Right. So instead of just looking at the landscape today, I think we need to trace the origin of this whole individual carbon burden, because this narrative didn't just, fall out of the sky.
No, it certainly didn't. It was engineered over decades.
Yeah. The Guardian recently highlighted a University of Sydney study that digs into this concept. They call it the net zero hero myth.
Right. And in academic terms, researchers referred to this phenomenon as the individualization of responsibility.
The individualization of responsibility. That sounds, it sounds very intentional.
Oh, it is. It's a highly intentional process by which a massive global collective action problem is completely reframed in the public consciousness. It gets reframed as something that can be solved primarily through aggregated personal decisions.
So changing the focus from the system to the person.
Exactly. The goal is to subtly transition the public from viewing themselves as citizens with political power to consumers with purchasing power.
Wow. From citizens to consumers. And the history of this playbook is wild because, well, it's not new at all. The sources point out that the beverage and packaging industries did the exact same thing back in the 1970s.
Ah, yes. The Keep America Beautiful campaign.
Yes, the famous campaign with the crying Native American on TV, which, by the way, that actor was actually Italian American, which is a whole other layer of crazy.
It really is.
But that entire campaign was funded by the companies manufacturing single-use plastics and cans. They systematically shifted the moral burden of waste disposal entirely onto the consumer so they wouldn't have to fundamentally change their highly profitable disposable packaging models.
It was brilliant marketing, frankly.
It was. But the climate version of this is where the strategy reaches a whole new level. Do you know who popularized the concept of the personal carbon footprint?
Well, the historical record points directly to British Petroleum, BP, back in 2004.
BP, a massive global fossil fuel corporation, launched one of the first major public relations campaigns asking you to calculate your personal emissions.
Yeah, they literally built a calculator on their website.
Right. They handed it to the public and basically said, look how much damage your lifestyle is doing to the planet.
And the timing and the source of that campaign are just incredibly important to understand the systemic trend we're discussing. I mean, by focusing the world's attention on the commute of the office worker or the thermostat settings of a suburban home, the conversation is effectively diverted.
Diverted away from what?
Away from the extraction and refinement of the fossil fuels themselves.
I mean, it's like an analogy I was thinking about earlier. It's like a CEO telling the night shift janitor that the company's bankruptcy is entirely their fault because they keep leaving the bathroom lights on.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. While completely ignoring the executives upstairs who are actively embezzling millions of dollars out of the corporate accounts. But my question, though, is how intentional is this today? Like, is this a maliciously coordinated strategy by massive industries, or is it just a natural, unavoidable byproduct of a hyper-consumerist society? Because we do naturally view every problem through the lens of individual choice.
Well, to unpack the mechanics of how this functions today, we have to look closely at that University of Limerick research. They provide a really vital conceptual framework called the Responsibility Power Justice Nexus, or the RPJ nexus.
The RPJ nexus.
Yeah. And this framework doesn't necessarily concern itself with the malicious intent of a single CEO. Instead, it looks at how the system operates structurally.
Okay, so how does the RPJ nexus explain this CEO and janitor dynamic on a massive global scale?
It really hinges on something called the responsibility power gap.
The gap.
Right. Under our current model of governance, individuals are increasingly burdened with the moral, psychological, and often financial responsibility to fix the climate crisis. The cultural messaging constantly tells you to buy the electric vehicle, transition to a vegan diet, install solar panels, meticulously sort your waste.
Which is exhausting.
It is, and when you inevitably fall short because living perfectly sustainably in a modern society is incredibly difficult and expensive.
Yeah, I mean, who can afford all that?
Exactly. You internalize that failure. The result is this documented, widespread eco-anxiety and guilt.
Right, so the responsibility side of the gap is sky high. But what about the power side?
Well, that is the absolute crux of the issue. You carry the responsibility, but you lack the structural power to actually change the massive systems that produce the vast majority of emissions. I mean, no matter how meticulously you sort your recycling, you cannot unilaterally decarbonize your national energy grid.
Right, I can't just go out and build a nuclear plant.
No, you can't. You cannot personally greenlight a high-speed public transit infrastructure for your city. You cannot rewrite industrial zoning laws.
So you're handed all the guilt, but literally none of the actual levers of power.
Precisely. The sociologist Ulrich Beck actually described this kind of structure as a system of organized irresponsibility.
Organized irresponsibility. I like that.
Yeah, the massive systemic actors, the ones who actually hold the levers to alter the grid or change industrial manufacturing, they diffuse their accountability by making everyone at the bottom of the pyramid feel individually responsible.
So if a systemic failure is framed as millions of individual consumer failures, then ultimately no one with actual structural power is held accountable.
Exactly. The burden is completely decentralized.
Okay, well, if the individual is left holding the bag, washing the peanut butter jars and feeling terrible about flying to see their parents, what exactly are those systemic actors doing? Because it's not like corporations are silent on this stuff. I mean, we hear about corporate net zero pledges constantly.
Oh, yeah.
Almost every Fortune 500 company has issued some glossy press release about it achieving net zero by 2030 or 2050.
Right. The rhetoric from the corporate sector is deafening. But we have to pivot here from the micro burden placed on you to the macro loopholes utilized by these massive entities.
Okay, the macro loopholes.
Yeah. This is where the Friends of the Earth analysis becomes incredibly illuminating. They break down the architecture of these corporate net zero pledges, and their conclusion is really that the very concept of net zero, as it's currently deployed, is often just a dangerous mathematical illusion.
A mathematical illusion. I think a lot of people might struggle to see how it's an illusion, though, because on the surface, net zero sounds like exactly what society wants. I mean, it sounds like a factory or a corporation producing zero pollution.
Well, the semantic difference between real zero and net zero is everything.
Right, real zero.
Yes, real zero means you actually alter your operations so that you no longer emit greenhouse gases, you stop polluting. Net zero, on the other hand, treats emissions as a financial ledger. You pollute over here in column A and you subtract over there in column B, usually by purchasing carbon offsets.
Ah, I see.
And the Friends of the Earth report argues that this accounting trick completely avoids the vastly more difficult, much more expensive work of actually reducing emissions at the source. They identify 4 massive conceptual flaws in how these corporate plans are built.
4 flaws. But wait, before we even get into the math of column A and column B, look at the timeline. If these corporate pledges are overwhelmingly set for the year 2050, aren't they basically just giving themselves a 25-year free pass to do nothing today?
That is exactly the first major flaw the report highlights.
It's like me telling my dentist, I pledge to start flossing every single day, starting in the year 2050. I get the gold star on my chart today, the PR victory, but I don't actually have to buy dental floss for 2 decades.
That is a perfect analogy. The delayed timeline allows a corporation to reap the immediate public relations benefits and, the ESG investments today, while essentially continuing business as usual. They maximize their current profit models for decades before any structural change is actually required.
Unbelievable. Okay, what's the second flaw?
The second is a heavy reliance on unproven technologies. If you dig into the fine print of these net zero by 2050 pledges, many of them don't actually map out a reduction in their core polluting activities.
So what do they map out?
Instead, their models assume that somewhere down the line, scientists will invent massive, globally scalable carbon capture and storage technologies. They are banking on machines that can essentially suck their pollution right out of the atmosphere.
So they are betting the future of the climate on a technological lottery ticket they haven't even bought yet.
Pretty much.
They're polluting today with the assumption that a magic vacuum cleaner will be invented tomorrow.
Precisely. I mean, the technology exists in prototype and small-scale form, sure, but certainly not at the planetary scale that their ledgers require. Which brings us to the third flaw. The explicit refusal to abandon the fossil fuel status quo.
Meaning they aren't actually stopping the drilling.
Right. Many energy companies' net zero plans do not include a managed decline of fossil fuel extraction. They just plan to keep pumping oil and gas indefinitely.
Which brings us to the fourth flaw, which the sources frame as perhaps the most devastating. And this is the concept of carbon colonialism. This concept really blew my mind because it grounds this abstract, ledger math into brutal physical reality.
It really does. The Friends of the Earth report uses a very specific, deeply researched case study to illustrate this. They examine the French energy giant Total SA and a massive project they initiated in the Republic of Congo.
Let's break this case study down because, honestly, on paper, it sounds phenomenal. Total SA signed an agreement to plant a 40,000-hectare forest on the Pateke Plateau in the Congo.
Right, a massive forest.
And the stated publicized goal is that this new forest will act as a massive carbon sink, sequestering 10 million tons of carbon dioxide over 20 years. Now, if I'm a consumer reading that press release, I'm thrilled. 10 million tons of carbon sucked out of the air. How on earth does a 40,000-hectare forest become a loophole?
You really have to look past the press release and examine the physical ecology of what is actually being planted there. Total SA is not regenerating a native biodiverse Congolese jungle. They are reportedly using invasive foreign trees for these projects.
Wait, invasive trees?
Specifically, species like acacia or eucalyptus imported from places like Australia or Asia.
But why eucalyptus? If you are in the Congo, why not plant local trees?
Because native forests grow at a natural, balanced pace, eucalyptus grows incredibly fast.
Ah, it's about speed.
Exactly. If your primary objective is not ecological restoration, but simply hitting a mathematical carbon metric on a corporate ledger as quickly as possible, Well, you plant the fastest growing biomass you can source.
But dropping an Australian tree into the middle of the Congo, that has to have immense ecological side effects, right?
Oh, it does. These are non-native species dropped into a delicate ecosystem. They can severely undermine local biodiversity. Eucalyptus, in particular, is notorious for draining water tables and altering the soil chemistry.
Wow.
Furthermore, the report notes Total's intention to eventually cut down these trees and process them for wood or energy. So we are not talking about a natural protected forest being preserved for perpetuity. It is effectively a massive industrial wood farm masquerading as climate action.
But what about the land itself? I mean, 40,000 hectares is a massive footprint. Was the Bateke Plateau just empty, unused dirt waiting for someone to drop eucalyptus seeds on it?
That assumption of empty land is the very foundation of the carbon colonialism critique, because the land is absolutely not empty. Extensive mapping and anthropological study of the plateau show that this specific area sustains the lives, cultures, and livelihoods of the Akea indigenous pygmies and local Bantu farming communities.
So people actually live there. They farm there.
They have lived there for generations.
Yeah.
And the report highlights that to secure this massive tract of land for the tree farm, these local communities face eviction and displacement from their ancestral territories.
So let me just make sure I'm tracing the mechanics of this correctly.
Go ahead.
An indigenous community in the Republic of Congo loses their ancestral land. Their water table is depleted by invasive species, and their livelihood is destroyed. All so that a massive energy company can plant an industrial tree farm.
Yes.
And they're doing this so they can keep extracting fossil fuels somewhere else and legally tell a consumer in Europe or North America that the gas they are putting in their car is technically net zero?
According to the critical analysis in these reports, that is the exact mechanism. It is the complete outsourcing of the consequences of pollution. A company in the global north continues to profit from emissions, but the physical, environmental, and human cost of offsetting those emissions is dumped onto marginalized communities in the global south.
That is incredibly bleak.
It allows the polluter to claim a green victory on their corporate ledger while local populations bear the absolute highest cost.
It's the ultimate systemic loophole. Which really brings us to the crux of this deep dive, because if the individual is weighed down by eco-anxiety and recycling guilt, and traditional energy corporations are using these massive offsetting loopholes in the global south, we have to pivot to the newest, fastest-growing industry on the planet.
Big tech and artificial intelligence.
It's exactly. While traditional energy companies use offsets to maintain their status quo, tech companies are demanding unprecedented, almost unfathomable amounts of raw new electrical power to fuel the AI boom. And they seem to be entirely bypassing the kind of grueling net zero scrutiny that is constantly placed on the individual.
The scale of this blind spot in the climate discourse is staggering. Just staggering. We are relying on a comprehensive report from ECOS, that's the Environmental Coalition on Standards, to really understand the sheer velocity of this infrastructure growth. We are not talking about a slight uptick in server usage because more people are watching Netflix on the weekend.
Right.
The data shows that in 2024, data centers accounted for 60% of the electricity demand growth in the global buildings sector.
Wait, I need to pause on that statistic.
Yeah.
60% of all new electricity demand in the global building sector came from just one single industry. Data centers.
Yes, 60%. The power demands are astronomical. Looking specifically at Europe, EU data centers consume between 45 and 65 terawatt hours of electricity in 2022.
Okay, 45 to 65 terawatt hours. That is a massive number. That means absolutely nothing to the average person, including me. How much power is a terawatt hour?
To ground that in reality, 1 terawatt hour is equivalent to 1 trillion watt hours. To put it in perspective, the entire country of Greece uses about 50 terawatt hours a year.
Oh my God.
So the data centers in Europe are already consuming the equivalent power of an entire industrialized European nation. And the ECOS report projects that Europe's data center power consumption will triple by the year 2030.
Triple. We are talking about adding the power demands of 2 more entire countries to the grid in just a few years.
Yes, in less than a decade.
But why is AI so uniquely power hungry? I mean, we've had the internet for decades. We've had cloud storage, global banking networks, streaming video in 4K. Why does asking ChatGPT to write an email or asking an AI generator to make a picture of a cat on a skateboard require so much more power than doing a standard Google search?
It comes down to the microscopic physical reality of the hardware. Traditional computing, like a standard search query, relies on CPUs, central processing units. You can think of a CPU like a single, incredibly fast race car. It is great at doing one tasks sequentially very quickly.
Okay, the race car.
Right. But AI models, especially large language models and deep learning networks, they don't think sequentially. They require massive parallel processing. They need to analyze billions of parameters at the exact same moment.
So they can't use the single race car.
Exactly. Instead of one CPU, AI requires thousands of specialized chips called GPUs, graphics processing units, or TPUs, tensor processing units. If a CPU is a single fast race car, a GPU is a fleet of 10,000 delivery trucks, all executing tasks simultaneously.
Wow. And running 10,000 delivery trucks at the exact same time creates an unbelievable amount of friction.
The thermal density is something traditional data centers literally were not built to survive. When you pack thousands of GPUs into server racks and run them at maximum capacity 24/7 to train an AI model, they generate immense concentrated heat.
They're basically ovens.
Yes, you can no longer just blow highly air-conditioned cold air down the aisles of the server farm. It just isn't enough to prevent the chips from melting. So the industry is having to adopt complex liquid cooling solutions, pumping chilled water directly into the server racks, circulating it through cold plates attached to the chips.
Which introduces a whole new environmental cost. Water.
The water consumption is immense. The EcoS report cites that training and operating AI models like ChatGPT can consume about 2 liters of fresh water for every 10 to 50 queries.
Wait, 2 liters?
Yeah, depending on the ambient temperature and the specific cooling systems in place.
2 liters of fresh water. A large soda bottle full of drinking water is evaporated just to ask a chatbot a handful of questions. Multiply that by hundreds of millions of active users, asking multiple questions every single day. We are looking at a hydrological nightmare in regions that are already facing drought conditions.
It's a massive strain on local resources.
But here's the defense you always hear from the tech industry. I've heard tech CEOs say this repeatedly on earnings calls. They argue, yes, it takes a lot of power now, but our engineers are brilliant. The next generation of chips is going to be 50% more energy efficient. The algorithms are getting smarter. Doesn't the relentless march of technological innovation solve this efficiency problem eventually?
That argument relies on a fundamental misunderstanding of tech economics. What you are describing is a classic phenomenon known as the Jevons paradox.
The rebound effect.
Yes, exactly.
It's like urban highway planning. Let's say a city has a highway with terrible gridlock traffic. The city council spends $2 billion to add 3 more lanes. For the first month, traffic flows beautifully. It's highly efficient.
Right.
But because the highway is now wider and faster, people who used to take the commuter train decide to start driving. Developers build new subdivisions further out into the suburbs because the commute seems easier. And within 2 years, the wider, more efficient highway is just as deadlocked as the old one. The increased efficiency just induced more demand.
That is the perfect analogy, and it maps exactly onto the AI boom. As GPUs become more energy efficient, and as it becomes cheaper to run a calculation, the tech companies do not just run their existing models for less energy.
They build bigger ones.
They build massively larger models. They deploy hundreds of thousands of chips instead of tens of thousands. Because the marginal cost of computing drops, they begin integrating AI into trivial, everyday applications. They put a generative AI chatbot in your word processor, in your email client, in your basic web search.
Things we never needed AI for.
Exactly. These are tasks that absolutely do not require massive neural networks to accomplish, but they do it because the efficiency allows for it. The efficiency gains at the micro level of the chip are completely swallowed by the exponential expansion of macro level use.
So the absolute energy consumption continues to skyrocket, totally negating any environmental gains from the better hardware. And we aren't just theorizing about this, right? We are seeing the real-world fallout on corporate balance sheets right now.
Oh, absolutely.
The sources point out that the absolute titans of the industry companies like Google, Microsoft, Meta, they are publicly having to backtrack on their highly publicized 2030 climate goals. Google's most recent environmental report showed a 48% increase in emissions since 2019.
48%.
Microsoft's emissions are up nearly 30% since 2020. And the companies openly admit that this spike is driven almost entirely by the build-out of their AI infrastructure.
And how these tech giants handle this massive public relations crisis brings us right back to the Friends of the Earth critique of corporate net zero. Because these tech companies are not halting the construction of data centers to meet their climate pledges.
Of course not.
Instead, they are utilizing financial and mathematical mechanisms to mask the surge. They do this largely by purchasing REC's renewable energy certificate and relying on the same questionable carbon offsets we discussed earlier.
I really want to understand how a RDC actually works because it sounds like another accounting trick. If a tech company builds a massive data center in an area powered mostly by coal, how do they claim the data center is 100% renewable?
It requires understanding how power grids function. When an electron is pushed onto the electrical grid, it is indistinguishable. An electron generated by a dirty coal plant and an electron generated by a pristine solar farm look exactly the same once they are in the transmission wire.
Okay, that makes sense.
You cannot direct the green electrons to only go to the tech company's data center. The grid mixes everything together.
So the data center is pulling a mix of coal and solar, whatever happens to be on the local grid.
Exactly. So to claim they are 100% renewable, the tech company purchases renewable energy certificates from a green power producer, say a wind farm halfway across the country. A REC is essentially a piece of paper that says, we generated 1 megawatt-hour of clean energy. The tech company buys that paper and applies it to their own ledger.
Wow.
So they are physically pulling coal-powered electricity to run their servers, but mathematically claiming the wind-powered electricity on their balance sheet.
It is a complete shell game. And the sources highlight that Microsoft recently bought millions of carbon credits to offset their AI emissions by investing in reforestation projects in the Amazon, which circles us right back to the Bateke Plateau in the Congo and carbon colonialism.
It's the exact same pattern.
They are emitting vast amounts of carbon to train an AI model in a server farm in a developed nation and balancing the ledger by claiming credit for trees in Brazil. It deeply obscures the actual localized environmental costs.
The localization of the cost is the key issue here, and the tech industry employs a very specific vocabulary that actively obfuscates the physical reality of their infrastructure. They call it the cloud.
Right. The cloud. The word itself is brilliant marketing. I mean, it sounds weightless, it sounds ethereal, it sounds like it just floats harmlessly above us, existing purely as invisible data in the atmosphere.
But the cloud is incredibly heavy. The cloud is made of millions of tons of concrete, reinforced steel, lithium-ion batteries, miles of copper wiring, and millions of gallons of diesel fuel. We have to physically ground this AI data center boom into the backyards of real communities to show who actually bears the physical weight of this infrastructure.
This is where the deep dive takes a turn into the human impact. We were looking at insights from a roundtable hosted by the National Wildlife Federation on Environmental Justice.
The NWF roundtables, yes.
They brought together community leaders, policy advocates, and researchers to talk about what it actually feels like when the invisible cloud physically moves in next door.
The NWF roundtables emphasize the sheer scale of the physical footprint. We are not talking about a small warehouse in an industrial park. We are talking about hyperscale data center campuses that can easily exceed 1 million square feet.
1 million square feet.
To visualize that, imagine 17 professional football fields entirely filled with racks of servers roaring with industrial cooling fans.
And a facility of that size doesn't just plug into a standard wall outlet.
No, exactly. A hyperscale facility requires entirely new dedicated electrical substations. It requires high-voltage transmission lines cutting through neighborhoods and forests. It requires immense water utility upgrades to handle the millions of gallons needed for cooling.
It's basically a small city.
It is. And crucially, because these AI models cannot tolerate a power outage, they require what the industry calls 5 nines, or 99.9999% reliability. They require massive arrays of diesel backup generators in case the main grid fails. These generators create severe localized air pollution and noise when they're tested or deployed.
Now, if I am a local mayor or a county commissioner in a rural or struggling industrial town and a trillion-dollar tech company says they want to build a hyperscale facility in my county, my eyes are turning into dollar signs.
Sure, understand.
I'm thinking, this is the economy of the future. This is a massive wave of high-paying tech jobs, immense tax revenue, and economic prosperity for my constituents. Isn't this an incredible economic boon for these towns?
The experts at the NWF Roundtable strongly push back on that narrative. They refer to it as the myth of economic development.
The myth. Why?
Because while the initial construction phase might bring a temporary influx of construction jobs, once a hyperscale data center is operational, it is essentially a highly automated, dark warehouse. Experts note that a massive million-square-foot facility might create only 20 to 25 permanent middle-class jobs.
Wait, 20 to 25 jobs for a facility the size of 17 football fields?
Yes. They require a handful of security guards, some cooling technicians, and server maintenance staff. That's it. They are not bustling automotive factories employing thousands of local workers. Furthermore, the economic burden on the community can be severe and completely unexpected.
What kind of burden? I thought they paid taxes.
Well, remember those massive power grid upgrades required to feed the data center? The new substations and high-voltage transmission lines? The NWF experts point out that the costs of upgrading that public utility infrastructure are often socialized.
Meaning the public pays for it.
Exactly. They are shifted onto the utility bills of the local households through rate hikes approved by public utility commissions.
Wait a minute, so the local residents, who might already be struggling with inflation and high utility costs, see their monthly power bills go up to subsidize the infrastructure needed for a multi-billion-dollar tech company's AI servers.
That is frequently the reality. And the environmental burdens, the noise, the strain on the water table, the diesel exhaust, are placed on communities that are often already marginalized and dealing with cumulative industrial pollution. The NWF series highlighted a very specific, incredibly stark example of this dynamic, the story of Tucker United in West Virginia.
This story really stuck with me in the source material because it illustrates the profound lack of transparency. Set the scene for us. What actually happened in Tucker?
Tucker County is a beautiful, relatively quiet area in West Virginia, and a proposal suddenly surfaced for a 1,600-megawatt gas power plant to be built in the community.
Okay, we need to contextualize 1,600 megawatts because, again, it is just a number to most of us.
For context, a 1,600-megawatt power plant is colossal. It is capable of generating enough electricity to power over 1 million homes. It is the equivalent of building the foundational power grid for a major American city.
And they wanted to build a power plant capable of running 1 million homes just to power a single hyperscale data center complex.
Yes. The data center required its own dedicated, massive fossil fuel power plant to ensure uninterrupted baseload power. And the design didn't stop there. Because of that 5 nines reliability requirement we talked about, the proposal included the on-site storage of 30 million gallons of diesel fuel.
30 million gallons of diesel. That is the equivalent of dozens of Olympic-sized swimming pools filled with toxic fuel, sitting in massive tanks next to an Appalachian watershed.
It's terrifying.
The environmental risk of a spill or a leak is catastrophic.
Oh.
How did the town find out about this? I assume for a project of this magnitude, the tech company and the developers held massive town halls, engaged the community, presented environmental impact studies.
The reality is chillingly different. According to the advocates from Tucker United, the local residents discovered this massive industrial proposal merely through a tiny permit notice tucked away in the back of the local newspaper.
You're kidding.
I'm not. Even the county commission didn't fully understand the scale of what was being proposed until the community uncovered it.
A permit notice in the classifieds for a 1 million home power plant and a diesel depot.
This is the crux of the environmental justice crisis outlined in the reporting. Decisions that will fundamentally alter the landscape, the water security, and the air quality of a community for generations are made in corporate boardrooms hundreds of miles away, shrouded in non-disclosure agreements.
Right.
The community, the people who will actually bear the risk of a diesel spill, the relentless hum of the cooling fans, and the pollution from the gas plant, they are completely excluded from the planning process until the ink is already dry on the permits. They are treated as an obstacle to be managed by PR firms rather than citizens with a fundamental right to determine what happens in their own backyards.
So we arrive at this incredible, infuriating paradox. On one hand, you, the individual listening to this, are being asked by campaigns and corporate calculators to monitor your personal carbon footprint, to skip the flight, to buy the electric car, to be the net zero hero. You are carrying that moral burden.
You are.
On the other hand, we have an AI industry building facilities that require dedicated 1,500 megawatt gas power plants and 30 million gallons of diesel, and they are largely bypassing the environmental scrutiny, the civic engagement, and the policy regulation that we demand of almost any other sector. It begs the question, why isn't there massive, immediate federal policy regulation holding them to the same standard?
To understand why regulation is lagging so far behind the physical reality on the ground, we really have to look at the strategic use of doubt as a corporate weapon. And this brings us to a fascinating essay from the 1% Rule Substack.
This essay makes a historical connection that is just brilliant. It compares the current rhetoric of the AI industry directly to a famous historical playbook, The Merchants of Doubt.
Yes. The Merchants of Doubt refers to a well-documented historical strategy. In the 1950s and 60s, the tobacco industry realized that the science proving cigarettes caused cancer was becoming undeniable.
So what do?
Instead of trying to definitively prove that smoking was safe, which was impossible, they hired brilliant PR experts and fringe scientists to simply manufacture doubt. They did the same thing later with the fossil fuel industry regarding acid rain and climate change.
Their goal wasn't to win the scientific argument. Their goal was just to keep the argument going in circles so they could keep selling their product. We need more studies. The data is inconclusive. We shouldn't rush into regulating an industry that provides so many jobs. That kind of rhetoric.
Exactly. The goal of manufactured doubt is to paralyze the regulatory process. And the 1% rule argues that we are witnessing a highly sophisticated modern evolution of this exact tactic in the AI space. But the modern delay tactic is an outright denial of risk.
Right. The AI CEOs are not sitting before Congress saying there are zero risks to this technology.
In fact, some of them are very vocal about apocalyptic science fiction risks, which basically serves as a distraction from the immediate environmental and labor impacts. The actual tactic being used to avoid regulation today is what the author calls the bureaucratization of risk and the capture of uncertainty.
The capture of uncertainty. That is a dense phrase. How does that look in practice when, say, a tech lobbyist is talking to a lawmaker?
It looks like an industry telling regulators that the technology is simply too complex for traditional oversight. The public and the lawmakers are told in very patient, highly technical tones that AI models are black boxes.
Black boxes.
Yes, that the algorithms are too complicated to audit even by their creators. We are told the internal weights, the training data, the energy algorithms, they are highly sensitive, private intellectual property that cannot be shared. And crucially, the ultimate trump card is deployed. We are told that regulating them now, slowing down the build-out of these hyperscale data centers, would mean losing an existential international technological race against geopolitical rivals, specifically China.
Ah, the national security argument. If we don't let them build the 1,600-megawatt gas plant in West Virginia without oversight, the other guys will build it first, and democracy will fall.
That's the playbook.
But I have to push back here, because this is a very common defense, and I want to hear the counter-argument. I'm struggling to see the difference between stalling progress and demanding safety. If I am demanding 10 years of safety tests and environmental impact studies on AI, couldn't an AI CEO just say that I am the one using doubt to block human progress and technological abundance?
That is a phenomenal question. And the author of the essay makes a really vital distinction to answer it. We must differentiate between two types of doubt: corrupted doubt and useful doubt.
Wait, what is the difference?
Corrupted doubt is what the tobacco industry used. It is an industry asking for endless, impossible-to-achieve studies specifically to delay oversight and maintain a highly profitable status quo. It is entirely self-serving.
Got it.
Useful doubt, however, is the foundation of public safety and a functioning democratic society. It is the public and regulators demanding an ethical, transparent, and inspectable framework before a high-stakes technology is deployed into the wild.
Give me a practical example of how useful doubt should work with AI versus how the industry treats it as a black box.
Think about institutions that make decisions profoundly affecting human lives. Imagine a hospital using a new AI diagnostic tool to determine if a patient has cancer, or a government benefits office using an AI algorithm to determine who qualifies for food stamps or housing assistance. The essay argues that these institutions should never be asked to use an AI system that no outside authority can audit, simply because the tech company promises their product is aligned or safe.
Right. If a human doctor misdiagnoses you, there's a medical board. There's a paper trail of their reasoning. There is malpractice insurance. There is accountability.
Exactly. But if an opaque AI model denies a citizen their life-saving benefits, and the human caseworker doesn't understand why the machine said no because it is a black box, accountability vanishes into the algorithm. Responsibility passes through so many layers of code and corporate subsidiaries that it leaves no fingerprints.
That is terrifying.
That is the true insidious danger of the modern merchants of doubt tactic. It's not necessarily that the AI will become a science fiction Terminator. It is that the industry is using the sheer complexity of the technology to build a world where legal liability and corporate accountability are impossible to trace. And simultaneously, the massive physical environmental costs of running those unaccountable algorithms are quietly dumped on communities like Tucker, West Virginia.
Okay. We have covered an immense amount of ground here, and it is a really heavy reality to digest. We started with the individual in their kitchen sorting and recycling, feeling the manufactured weight of the net zero hero myth. We looked at how corporate entities use carbon colonialism and accounting tricks to balance their ledgers. We explored the staggering hidden physical footprint and energy hunger of the AI data center boom, the environmental justice impact on local communities, and the strategic use of complexity and doubt to avoid accountability.
There's a lot.
It is. I can easily imagine that for you listening to this, the urge to just throw your hands up in the air and stop trying is overwhelming. If the burden has been unfairly engineered to fall on me, and big tech and massive polluters are legally evading responsibility, why should I even bother washing out the peanut butter jar or making sustainable choices?
It is a completely rational, understandable feeling of exhaustion. It is the logical conclusion of organized irresponsibility. But the sources we are analyzing are incredibly clear on this final point. Throwing your hands up in defeat is absolutely not the answer.
So what is the answer?
We need to synthesize the research from the Climate Change and Social Justice blog and the University of Limerick paper to really see the structural path forward.
Because the math itself is somewhat sobering, isn't it? When we look at individual action versus systemic action.
It is sobering. The research acknowledges a hard mathematical reality that we have to face. Even if there was a miraculous, widespread adoption of high-impact personal behaviors, if millions of people suddenly shifted to entirely plant-based diets, completely eliminated their car use, and stopped flying, it might only reduce national emissions by a few percentage points over a decade.
Just a few percent.
Yes. The sheer scale of industrial and infrastructure emissions is simply vastly larger than aggregated individual consumer choices can solve.
What?
But the research also shows that systemic interventions, things like completely decarbonizing the national energy grid, reforming national transportation infrastructure, and enforcing strict industrial emissions standards on data centers, can cut global emissions by over 50% in that exact same time frame.
So the math definitively proves the point we started with. Systemic change is the heavy lifter. The system has to change. So I ask again, why keep sorting the recycling? Why maintain the individual effort if the math says it barely moves the needle compared to industrial regulation?
Because the researchers argue that the individual versus systemic debate is a false binary.
A false binary.
It is a trap designed to induce apathy. Individual action is absolutely essential, but it must be reframed and leveraged differently. The RPJ framework, the Responsibility, Power, and Justice Nexus from the Limerick paper, argues that we have to fundamentally shift how individuals view their role. We must move away from seeing ourselves merely as passive consumers of green products.
Right. Buying a slightly greener, more expensive version of a product or using a paper straw isn't enough to challenge a systemic power structure.
Exactly. We have to transition our identity from passive consumers to active citizens. Individual action matters immensely, but it matters most when it is used as a foundation to demand and drive structural reform. Your personal actions, your values, your local choices, they are the cultural foundation that makes mass systemic political pressure possible.
I love that distinction. From consumer to citizen. A consumer chooses which brand of AI to buy. A citizen demands to know how much water the data center is pulling from their local reservoir. And the sources provide incredible examples of how this shift from consumer to citizen is already happening right now in the real world.
Yeah.
This isn't just academic theory. We are seeing collective action driving real systemic change.
We absolutely are. If we look at the financial sector, we have seen widespread, persistent grassroots movements forcing massive university endowments and multi-billion-dollar pension funds to divest completely from fossil fuels. That is, individual precious students and workers aggregated into immense systemic financial leverage. It forces corporations to alter their practices because their access to capital is fundamentally threatened.
And what about the data centers? We talked about communities like Tucker being steamrolled by a lack of transparency. Are communities actually fighting back against the hyperscale build-out?
They are, and they are winning. The NWF reporting highlights that communities are waking up and refusing to simply accept the inevitability of this massive infrastructure. We are seeing powerful local coalitions successfully securing legal moratoriums against unchecked, unregulated data center development in states like Michigan and Georgia.
Oh, wow.
Citizens are demanding that zoning boards halt construction until comprehensive environmental and grid impact studies are completed. In Texas, a county recently unanimously rejected a massive package of tax breaks for a proposed $3 billion AI data center.
Wait, they turned down the money?
They did.
Yeah.
After intense, organized pushback from local residents and officials who did the math, saw the strain it would place on their local water and power resources, and demanded to protect their community over corporate promises.
That is the ultimate power of the citizen over the consumer. The residents of that Texas county didn't just try to personally use less electricity to make room for the AI. They organize politically to regulate the physical footprint of the corporation in their community.
That is the synthesis the research points us toward. You do not abandon personal responsibility, you elevate it. You align your individual choices with collective political and civic action to close that responsibility power gap. You demand that the systems change so that making the sustainable choice isn't an exhausting, expensive, uphill battle for the individual, but rather the default setting of the civic infrastructure itself.
Okay, let's bring this all together. What a journey through these sources. We started by unpacking how the net zero hero myth was deliberately constructed, utilizing a PR playbook from the 1970s beverage industry and BP to systematically shift the psychological and moral burden of the climate crisis onto you, the individual.
Right. And we explored how corporate net zero pledges often function as complex mathematical loopholes, allowing massive companies to avoid the hard work of reducing emissions at the source by engaging in carbon colonialism, utilizing land and displacing indigenous communities in the global south to offset pollution generated in the north.
We stared into the massive blind spot of the AI data center boom. We learned that the ethereal cloud is actually made of concrete, steel, immense thermal friction, and millions of gallons of fresh water. We saw how the insatiable energy demands of parallel processing are forcing major tech companies to quietly backtrack on their climate goals while they mask the damage with renewable energy certificates that function like a grid-level shell game.
And we grounded that abstract reality in the very real environmental justice crisis facing local communities. We saw how the promised economic benefits of hyperscale facilities often fail to materialize, generating very few permanent jobs, while the immense burdens of noise, pollution, and multi-million-dollar utility grid upgrades are shifted directly onto local households.
And we decoded the modern Merchants of Doubt playbook, seeing how the AI industry uses the sheer complexity of their black box algorithms and the threat of international geopolitical competition to bureaucratize risk. They deploy doubt to delay the kind of basic, transparent accountability and regulation we expect from any other powerful industrial sector.
Ultimately, arriving at the powerful realization that the path forward isn't choosing between individual action or systemic change, but fusing them together. Using our power not just as consumers making micro choices in the grocery aisle, but as citizens demanding macro accountability at the zoning board and the ballot box.
Which brings us to a final, provocative thought for you to carry with you as you navigate the rest of your week. We live in a deeply digital world, and that isn't going to change. We're going to continue to use these tools. But the next time you open a chatbot to summarize a long article, or you use an AI tool to generate a funny photorealistic image to send to a friend, take a moment to consider the physical weight of that digital action. Somewhere in the world, a massive industrial fan is spinning faster. Cold water is flowing over a hot processor. A diesel generator might be sitting in a massive tank next to a watershed just in case the grid fails. Ask yourself, if we as individuals are constantly asked to painstakingly calculate and reduce our personal carbon footprints, when are we going to collectively demand to see the environmental footprint of the algorithms that are asking us to do so?
It is a profound shift in perspective. The goal is to stop looking only at our own reflection in the mirror of climate responsibility and start looking deeply at the massive industrial machinery operating behind the glass.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives you are handed. Keep looking past the shiny surface of the information you are fed. And the next time you are washing out that plastic peanut butter jar, remember, your actions absolutely matter, but your voice and your power as a citizen matter even more. Until next time.